This is Ryan Whitmarsh-Jones with my submission for the Go Jaeger Hall of Heroes contest. I did try to submit it properly using the submission form that you have available on the Go Jaeger website. However, there is not an option to submit a text file. Also, when I tried to use the text form instead, it did not give me enough space for the story. I did try to attach it as a file anyway, but it looks like it only submits video links and picture files. So I'm taking matters into my own hands, and I'm going to read it to you. This is the story of how Moses from Attack the Block grows up to be Jake Pentecost, Jaeger Ranger. I think I've tried to record this 10 times. I keep telling myself that flubbing the words is not good enough and then starting over. And I'm never going to finish that way. So instead, if I flub the words, I'm just going to pause and continue gaily forward. So if it's not perfect, I apologize, but I know I'd regret it if I didn't send it. So we're going to try to do this anyway. That's a better angle there. Okay. So with no further ado, I'm going to read you this story. Jacob Moses Pentecost, you have been charged with armed robbery, possession of a Class A drug, vandalism, and arson with the intent to endanger life. How do you plead? Moses could feel his uncle's eyes bore into his back, but he looked the judge in the eye anyway. He would not be timid in this room. I plead guilty to armed robbery and possession of a Class A drug. I plead not guilty to vandalism and arson with the intent to endanger life. Leaning far over his podium, the judge heaved a sigh. Boy, the explosion you caused destroyed your home and left the apartment surrounding you structurally unstable. Even ignoring the vandalism, how do you expect to tell me that you did not intend to endanger life? Your Honor. Your Honor, his defense attorney stood. Her slim hand rested reassuringly on Moses' shoulder. I should hope that the evidence we will present to you and my lord upholds Mr. Pentecost's pleas. Much of the trial after that was a blur. Moses remembered more clearly the pre-trial hearing. The prosecutor was merciless, as was Nathaniel Eustace Perkins Esquire's reputation. Spittle had flown from his lips on his more persuasive points. He reminded Moses of a half-starved bulldog, with flagrant jowls and a too-thin frame. Tia testified on his behalf both during the pre-trial hearing and during the trial itself, and it was the only part of the proceedings that made him want to duck his head. Her appraisal of him was glowing. She made him out to be a better person than he was, citing his academic achievements as well as his loyalty to his friends. She talked at length about his supposed integrity. Hearing someone talk him up to be so big made him feel unjustifiably small. Worse was when the nurse testified for him. He had apologized for mugging Sam with the boys, but to see her at the stand carefully detailing the events of the night after that brought it home hard. When Perkins tried to connect him to the mugging, her reply was measured. The ones who attacked me had their faces covered. She tucked her hair behind her ear, her returned ring glinting on her finger. In the end, all of my belongings were returned, but if it wasn't for Moses, for Mr. Pentecost and his friends, I would not be alive right now. I wouldn't be able to call my mother on my returned phone. I wouldn't be able to show my medical identification to go to work. I would be horrendously maimed or dead because of the beasts that were roaming the block. At least his defense attorney was doing her part well. Abigail Cornett, Esquire, picked apart every bit of evidence that Perkins wanted to brush aside. The few times that his uncle visited him, he explained her background. Prosecutors hated going against her, and her ability to exploit the smallest details was lauded by her colleagues. If it was someone else she was defending, Moses might have been able to find it amusing. Perkins' jowls nearly trembled every time she landed a sound point. But the testimony he would never forget was his uncle's. Jeremiah Pentecost was an older man, but spry, his broad frame filling the stand. His hair was cut close to his head, but even then you could see the swirls, dark except at the temples. It was the only feature on the man's whole body that betrayed age, a shock of silver stretching back just past his ears. Moses knew that there was a tattoo on his right pectoral. It was the portrait of a young man, faded like a newspaper clipping, that Jeremiah had never mentioned, and Moses had never gathered the courage to ask about. "Mr. Pentecost," Perkins said, peering at the legal pad in his skeletal hand. "As I understand it, you are your nephew's legal guardian. Is that so?" "Yes, sir." "And according to your interview with Police Officer Everil Travers, you told police that while you're not home often, your nephew didn't get into more trouble than any other boy his age," the prosecutor added. He drew out the last part of it, and the word trouble seemed to roll on his tongue. Jeremiah nodded. "Yes, that is what I said." Perkins thumped his hand hard on the legal pad, which made a gallery attendee jump. "And yet your nephew was apprehended at one point in the night with half an ounce of cocaine that evening. Do you have a comment for that?" "I object," Cornett said. "I asked the court for relevance." "The question pertains to young Mr. Pentecost's character." Perkins gestured broadly with the legal pad. "His character is of course relevant to his actions." "I'll allow it," the high judge said. No matter how often Moses tried to remember the judge in later years, he always came up with a blank face. "Please answer the question, Mr. Pentecost." "Like you said," Jeremiah responded as he leaned back in his seat. "I'm not home much. If Moses was getting up to things he shouldn't have been, it didn't reach home. If he was able to get cocaine, I think the more relevant question is how police are doing little enough to allow a 15-year-old boy to get roped into drug cartels. Believe. The record shall strike Mr. Pentecost's last comment." The judge looked down at his uncle. "Mr. Pentecost, I shall ask you to refrain from disparaging the police in my courtroom." "Mr. Pentecost, I shall ask you to refrain from disparaging the police in my courtroom." Shrugging, Jeremiah kept his eye level at Perkins. Moses always thought of this as his rough and ready look. To the outsider it seemed calm enough, but Moses knew if he ever got out of this courtroom it'd be hell at home for a while. Save the block or not, he'd cause a lot of harm. "When looking at the damage caused to your home and the apartments surrounding it, what do you think is an appropriate punishment for your nephew's actions?" "I'm not the kid's father." Moses' head snapped up when Jeremiah said this. He spoke of his father rarely. "But he's a military man." Maybe that would set him straight. "Military school's rough. Moses is smart enough for any school, but it's the discipline that ought to do it." The rest of the proceedings were long and dull. Cornett begged outside of the courtroom for Moses to pay closer attention, but he couldn't see the point. "I'm as good as murked anyway," he said, a mug of tea she had brought him clutched between his hands. Some days it seemed like the trial would never end, but abruptly it did. The high judge announced that the Crown Court found him not guilty of armed robbery, despite his original plea, as well as vandalism and arson with the intent to endanger life. After reviewing the testimonies of many of the block's residents, as well as security footage from several of the surrounding businesses, we have determined that under the circumstances you did your best to protect the block and the surrounding neighborhoods, the first judge said. The matter of possession is another thing entirely. However, the high judge said, because this is your first offense, we have decided to be lenient with your sentencing. We found your uncle's idea intriguing. Thank you, by the way, Mr. Pentecost. We have decided that attending military school will be your sentence. Don't take this lightly, another judge added. You will be placed under electronic tag surveillance until the Crown Court can arrange for your attendance. While attending the school for the first year, your arrest anklet will be programmed for the parameters of the campus. If you leave that campus outside of the court's permission, you will be breaking your parole and will end up right back here. The high judge nodded, a thin smile on a face Moses would never remember. But do well and stay on campus, and at the end of your first year we will reevaluate your case and remove the anklet. If you wish to end your education there and achieve satisfactory results on your A-levels, you will still have 2 years' worth of probation. If you take this route, you will be on a very tight leash. The other option will be to continue your education and enjoy a few more liberties. Moses went home. Technically, Moses went 3 floors up, but the layout was the same. Grateful residents sometimes visited with food, but Jeremiah didn't allow visitors. He carefully guarded Moses, making sure he dealt with daily chores effectively and efficiently. The electronic tag had no job to do under his watch. 3 days into his home imprisonment, Jeremiah handed Moses something soft, familiar, and badly singed. Figures it's one of the only things left after you blew up the apartment, he said gruffly as he placed a large hand on his head. Moses turned it over in his hands, absently tracing familiar red and blue and unfamiliar holes. Thank you, Uncle. A week into his home imprisonment, Jeremiah took even further pity and let him eat some of the desserts Tia and the girls had brought. The day before he was supposed to go to the military school the Crown Court had chosen, his uncle allowed him a visit with Pest. "You're alive, bruv!" he shouted the moment Moses walked into his bedroom. He slung himself onto his crutches to cross the small space. "Mom wouldn't tell me anything. I thought the Crown Court murked you." Moses laughed, and he was struck by how long it had been. "Almost, fam." "You heard from Biggs?" "He bare lucked out, man." "I heard from no one. My uncle's been keeping me under lock and key since the trial." He sat on Pest's bed. His eyes quickly checked the usual hiding places for bangers and found none. "Your mom cleaned you out." "Believe." "You'll write me from school, won't you, Moses?" He thought of Tia's question again as his uncle drove the rental car to the school. It was a shift to the gut every time he remembered it. "Where'd you get the Predator, fam?" Jeremiah finally asked. "What?" Moses stared at him. "It wasn't some movie shit, Uncle. It was a bare real alien." "Not what I meant, and watch your damn mouth." He checked the rearview mirror again. It was a habit that Moses noticed every time they drove somewhere, not that it was often. "That shit'll get you in trouble at school, and it ain't easy street if you sent to prison, innit?" "No, I'm talking about the knife. The macabre 241 Predator. That's too rare and expensive for you to get your hands on. I don't care how much cocaine you were selling." "I wasn't selling." Moses watched the passing scenery again. He wanted to be stoic, but he knew his uncle wouldn't allow the question to go unanswered. "Grabbed it from your dresser." "Thought so." He thought his uncle was going to let him be quiet again, but he asked, "Your first baggie?" "Never seen white before that." The trees parted to the campus drive. A staff member was waiting at the front steps. He escorted the two of them to the dorms in silence, up to the 5th floor, room 521. "You'll find your welcome brochure on the bed, as well as your handbook. Your map of the grounds is in the back of your binder provided by the Crown Court. Your first class is at 0600 hours tomorrow." He turned to Jeremiah. "I'll lead you to the school's main office for any further briefing you may need. Please follow me." Jeremiah started following him, but he paused in the doorway. "Be good, Moses," he said. Moses stared at him. "Be good." He frowned. "Be good," he said again, and left down the hall. When he was only visible through Moses' window, he heaved a sigh and started unpacking. At least he would be heading home for the February half-term holiday. He could hold out until then. "Of course I can," he said, tucking his burned blanket into a far corner of the dresser. "I can kill aliens. I can make it here." He didn't have many clothes or other belongings to fill the dresser in the closet, but it didn't matter. The school's uniforms were already neatly folded into the dresser, one drawer labeled every day, another combat training, and the third dress. Only the top drawer was empty. The closet had much more available space, but still on the far left was a shoe caddy with shoes labeled for the appropriate occasion. The actual surprise were the two books resting in the bottom of his bag, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. He sat down on the too thin mattress to flip through them, and a note slipped out of the Odyssey. Fight your battles, face your calypso, and come home. Don't forget, where you came from can shape you, but it will never define you. Do good. Tia. Damn, Tia. How much did you pay my uncle to put this thing in my bag? Some bare amount. Kicking off his shoes, he leaned back on his bed and opened the Iliad. Moses lost track of time as he turned the worn pages. He stopped here and there to read Tia's notes. He wondered if Dion and Gloria knew she read this stuff. Dimples probably knew. Whether it was because she was nosy or because Tia told her, Moses didn't know. The door opened sharply as Moses was reading Odysseus's case for continued battle. A red-headed boy with a constellation of freckles across his nose and cheeks tossed his duffel bag onto the other bed in the room. He didn't address him as he closed the door behind himself. Moses sat up, dog-earing the book and wondering if he should introduce himself. The boy didn't pay any attention to him. Instead, he intently unpacked uniforms and placed them in the appropriate drawers. His closet was organized in an expedient and color-coded fashion, casual clothes for when they didn't have classes or extracurriculars. The clothes were either very bright or pastel. None of the pants were even normal denim. "Can I help you?" the boy snapped. "No." He lay back down on the bed and returned to his book. In the morning, the boy threw a pillow at him. Or at least Moses had to assume it was morning. The world outside was still dark and cold. "What is it?" he asked as he sat up. His heart was thundering, and he strained his ears to hear any soft, thudding footsteps in the hall. He wished he had his switchblade. "It's 4:30. Get up." "What in the bloody hell am I getting up for?" Moses scowled and pulled his covers back on. "We have to get clean, four-corner the beds, pass inspection, and get to breakfast all before class, which is in an hour and a half." He smoothed the crease on his bed and went to his dresser. "I let you sleep, but if I'm going to teach you how to four-corner your bed, you have to get up." Moses considered telling him to get murked, but he rolled out of bed instead. The boy told him how to make the bed in precise, short steps, making him redo it until he was satisfied. "Good. You still have time to get dressed before inspection." The boy studied him after he was in uniform, a look that was not quite a frown on his face. "You've never tied one of those before, have you?" he said with a tinge of despair. "No." He sighed and reached forward. "I'll teach you after class." They both passed inspection, which was no less bizarre than expected. Moses had had people relentlessly stare at him before, but this was different. The man inspecting their clothes and their room expected perfection, whereas every other person who had stared at him for so long was looking for imperfections. "Dismissed, gentlemen," he said at last. The boy nodded. "Thank you, sir. I'll lead our new cadet into the cafeteria." Moses followed him down pristine halls. There were other people his age rushing toward the cafeteria as though it was going to close. But the boy took sure, measured steps. Their morning started this way for the next few weeks. The boy, whose name was Charles, as he found out later, would make sure that he was prepared for inspections, and then they would attend all their classes together. Apparently it was traditional to have the new students' schedules match their roommates. Charles seemed well liked by others, despite his tendency to be curt, and he performed well in all of his classes. He did not perform well in combat training. The school was well known for its expensive assault course, with its belly robber, dirty name, tough nut, and many other obstacles. Charles was passable, and although he had never finished in the front of the pack, he never finished last either. It was the actual hand-to-hand that he struggled with. He flinched whenever somebody stepped near him. He was easy to knock down and dismiss. The weekend came. Normally, Charles would run off for the day, fashionable and eager to be off campus. Moses couldn't follow if he wanted to. Most of the time he read more of the Odyssey, finish the Iliad the second week in, while Charles was gone, or sometimes he would go run the assault course if he was feeling antsy or if the soft footsteps in the hall sounded unsettlingly familiar. This Saturday morning, Moses got up, dressed in the combat uniform, and tossed a matching uniform onto Charles's stomach. "Oof," he said, sitting up in surprise. "What are you doing? It's Saturday." "Helping. Come on." "What are you talking about?" Charles rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. "What could you possibly be helping with at 0400? Up. Come on." "Bullocks, fine." Satisfied, Moses led a now uniformed Charles to the training grounds. The assault course was empty. Only the soft call of birds broke the morning silence. Charles sighed. "You don't have to help me with the assault course. I get through it." "You shouldn't assume shit, bruv. I said nothing about the assault course." His eyes flew wide and he took a step back. "You're not going to hit me, are you? Come on, I just wanted to make sure you passed inspection." "No, I'm not going to hit you." Keeping his promise, Moses instead gave him a hearty shove. Charles went sprawling. "Plant your feet." "What was that for?" Moses hauled him to his feet. "Do you want to flinch every time that big brawler takes a swing at you, or do you want to swing back?" "I'm not cut out for fighting," Charles said, dusting off his pants. "Besides, I catch enough guff at home." He leveled a look at him. He knew better than to question another's home life. It certainly didn't gain you friends on the block. Instead, he took Charles by the shoulders until he looked him in the eye. "Listen, sometimes you fight because that's the right thing to do. I found that out on bonfire night. Other times you fight because the fight is all you have. But then," Moses shrugged, "sometimes you fight to wipe the smug look off of someone's face." "Did you really take out aliens that night?" "Believe." Charles laughed, not mocking but incredulous. "I guess it would be nice to lob Colony one on his fat face." "He deserves it," Moses agreed as he dropped his hands. "What if I get hurt, though?" He pondered this. Getting hurt was assumed back in the block. Of course they had all done their best, but none of them had ever really considered themselves safe. It only figured that Charles, who worked so hard to keep himself pristine and upstanding, would worry about it. "Allow it," he said. "Allow it?" Moses nodded. "Allow it, and then come back harder." After that, they came to the training grounds every Saturday. Moses didn't start sparring with Charles until he could stand on his own after a good shove. When Charles went home for the Christmas holiday, he promised to keep up the practice with another student who lived down the street. Moses stayed at school and picked up the Iliad again. When Charles came back, they were at it again every Saturday. Other students noticed the improvement, both during sparring and on the course, and his popularity rose sharply. He didn't seem to notice much, still taking off on most Sundays. Most, but not all. Now Charles stayed in the dorm sometimes, and they would get disappointingly tame movies from the school's library or work on homework. Once he showed Moses how to sneak up onto the roof of the dorm. The first rule breaking after such a dry spell felt liberating. My hand gets sore. "It's not like I went out looking for trouble," he explained to Charles as they watched the sunrise. "I just don't feel in control anywhere else." "It figures you would feel in control where the trouble is," Charles laughed. "I'd like some control too. I don't want to join the military, not like most of the kids here." "You don't?" Moses had always thought he did with how hard he dedicated himself to the civics and politics courses they had to take. "Nah, my old man does. He wants me to do a lot of things." The sentence hung heavy in the air. "He wants me to be a boy." Moses mulled over this. He supposed this changed nothing about Charles, really, except what he was to call her. But when he looked at her out of the corner of his eye, he watched her hand visibly shake as she pushed her hair out of her face. "I could ask the boys back home to light up your dad's place with bangers if you wanted," he offered at last. "Props and Mayhem would like that." She snorted with laughter, but she looked at him with tears in her eyes. Thanks, Moses. I don't think that'd help, but thanks. He shrugged. What do you want me to call you? When I do let myself think about it, I think Anne sometimes. She wiped her eyes and leaned on his arm. Maybe Sadie? Her weight was comfortable against him. Part of him said he should shrug her off, but having her there was soothing. I don't think they're tough enough names for you. She laughed again, giving him a shove. You take that back. They were pirates, some of the toughest women of their age. It was rumored that Anne Bonny escaped It's rumored that Anne Bonny escaped hanging when she was found guilty of her crimes. The last thing she said to her second husband was that if he had fought like a man, he wouldn't hang like a dog. Police, Moses chuckled. That's harsh, fam. She'd be able to hang out with Tia's crew. And Sadie the goat Farrell was amazing. She was a mugger before she ever hit the sea, and when people didn't hand over their stuff fast enough, she'd headbutt them in the face. There are 5 other Anns in our class. Yeah, there are, she admitted. Sadie it is, then. After that, it was much harder for Moses to remember to call her Charles when they weren't in their room together. She smiled more when she was called by her new name. She laughed more easily. She was also much more liberal with the simple shows of affection, which Moses never knew he wanted. Before he knew it, the February half-term break was there. You going to be okay at home? He asked Sadie as they packed up. I'll have to be, she said. She placed a pair of bright yellow jeans in her bag. Besides, I'll see you in a week. Well, a bit more than that. Yeah, a bit more. He had made it through the year at the military school, and it wasn't all that bad in the end. Sadie had finished strong as well. They had traded phone numbers at the end of the year. Or, more accurately, Sadie had given him her phone number. Moses wasn't sure yet if his uncle was going to allow him a phone. You're coming back next year, right? We can room again, Moses said while they were both waiting for their families to pick them up. Sadie went quiet, intently looking at her shoes. Eventually she said, I'm sorry, Moses. No. I've talked to my aunt in Birmingham. I'm moving in with her and transferring to a school there. Oh. He felt hit in the gut. All right, then. You gave me the courage to do so, you know. She rocked back on her heels. I told her the truth. She's going to get me the hormones I need to transition. I'll be a real girl. You are a real girl. Oh, Moses. She hugged him tightly. You're amazing. I swear I'll call, okay? Just as soon as you give me a number. He wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close, close enough that he lifted her off the ground. He felt her laugh in his chest and it ached. When he let her down, she gave him a kiss on the cheek. You don't have to. It's your birthday tomorrow, isn't it? She asked as he let go. Happy birthday. There were 2 sharp beeps, and Moses looked across the school's driveway. Jeremiah waited in a rental similar to the one that he had dropped him off in, and in the back seat was an eager pest. You let me know if you change your mind about the bangers, he said as he slung his bag over his shoulder. She grinned. I just might. After Moses had his bag loaded in the trunk, he slipped in the front seat of the car. They sat in silence until the school was out of view. They weren't too rotten, were they, the teachers there? Jeremiah asked. Was that your boyfriend? Pest said at the same time. You could have told us, Moses. No, I'm thinking I'll go back next year, Moses said. And shove off it, Pest. I don't got a boyfriend. But he kissed you. He rolled his eyes. It was a friendly thing. And she? She? Jeremiah said, raising an eyebrow. They didn't room you with a girl, did they? That's a recipe for trouble, isn't it? Moses shrugged. Not on purpose, they didn't. She wasn't out yet. She said now she is. His uncle nodded. Your grandfather was like that. Really? Said Pest. He was If you say what I think you're about to say, I'm going to reach over this seat and hit you so hard your grandfather feels it, Jeremiah warned over his shoulder. Don't talk shit about people who've got to be braver than you. Sorry, fam. I didn't know that, Moses said. He wouldn't have wanted you to, his uncle said. He gave birth to your dad and me before he started living like he wanted to. Never known anybody else to do something unselfish as that. His husband left him, but we always had our old man. Lucky you. Jeremiah looked at him strangely for a moment before turning his attention back to the road. Yeah, lucky me. 10th of August, 2013. Moses didn't think anyone old enough to talk would ever forget that day. He and Pest had gone to Biggs' apartment. Biggs had kept his promise to his mother and never got wrapped up in gang business again, but that didn't make her any more lenient with him. She had given Moses a warning glare sharp enough to make him shiver. Never mess with moms, man, he said under his breath as she went back to the kitchen. Biggs nodded sagely. Believe, he said. The news station was on in the background, but softly, more there for the noise than actual information. The boys fell into easy conversation and ignored it. How about that girl you've been seeing, Pest? Biggs asked. Any action on the court? Biggs, if I told you that, there wouldn't be any, believe. Moses grinned. That's good. You found a girl who knows she's good enough to have your discretion. I don't know if I ever want to be with a girl, Biggs said, almost absent-mindedly. Pest looked ready to ask him what he meant, but instead his attention was suddenly glued to the television. Bruv, check out the telly! Biggs slammed his hand on the remote and turned up the volume. On the screen was some U.S. city, although Moses couldn't tell it was San Francisco at the time, being attacked by something massive. It had a thick, stony-looking protrusion coming out of its forehead and stretching the back of its head. Its teeth were at least as tall as a man, and as it reached out a clawed hand, it was clear that the monster was going to decimate the Golden Gate Bridge. That's some Power Rangers shit, Biggs said under his breath. That don't look nothing like what we fought on Guy Fawkes night, Pest whispered. That thing's bigger than the whole block. Moses was quiet, watching intently. The news station was not able to tell its viewers that the monster had been chased out of the city. That wouldn't happen for another 6 days. As you know, Mr. Pentecost, we have all of our Year 13 students come in for counseling before starting their last semester here, the guidance counselor said, adjusting her glasses on her broad nose. Her hair was braided back tightly, and a mole stood out jauntily against her dark skin, right next to her green eyes. You have provided exemplary work throughout your entire career with us. You could most likely get into any school you would like. What were you thinking? I was thinking of applying for the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps, Miss Ainsworth, Jake replied. He had been trying the name out over the last year and liked it. At least people didn't whisper about him and aliens when he used it, not like with his middle name. It's an exciting division. She chuckled nervously. It is at that. Are you sure you wouldn't like to go into something more stable? I don't want to be disrespectful, Jake replied, measuring his tone. But as the kaiju don't show signs of stopping their attacks, I would say that being a ranger is very stable. Brawler Yukon is only one Jaeger. That's not a good track record for killing these Goliaths. There's always going to be the first of something, ma'am. I'd be happy to follow in those footsteps and make a difference. Well, that road isn't going to be easy for you, Jacob, Miss Ainsworth said, rifling through papers. She seemed to find what she was looking for and handed it to him. Not many people get through the Jaeger Academy. I understand, he said, accepting the brochure. But I can. When he was back in his dorm, he spread the brochure wide to read the information. It wasn't anything he hadn't read already. The Jaeger Academy was in Kodiak Island, Alaska. It was a simple enough process, as rigorous as it would be. Officer training, Clune combat room, drifting testing, drive suit testing, and final Jaeger training to be Ranger ready. The Jaeger program had made huge strides in a small amount of time, in no small part due to his father's dedication. Stacker Pentecost was world renowned as a ranger, but after losing his drift partner, he stopped piloting and started teaching instead. Not that his patronage was going to help him at all. Jake hadn't seen his father since he was 5. He knew better than to think that his pursuit of a ranger's license would bring them closer together. He wasn't even sure he wanted that. But to pilot a Jaeger was to take responsibility for the safety of others, and he knew how that felt. Even in the back of a squad car at 15, he understood the weight of the lives of others on his shoulders, and it was a terrifying yet comfortable burden. If he could take away the guilt of having caused the disaster, he could get very accustomed to protecting those that needed protecting. All he had to do was finish the school year. After that, he already had his ticket to Kodiak Island. Biggs and Pest had saved up the money to get it for him after they realized how important it was to him. They said Tia had chipped in, but they hadn't talked in so long that Jake wasn't sure that was true. Just one more semester, one more round of tests, and he was going to the Jaeger Academy. Jacob Moses Pentecost was becoming a ranger. The training was brutal. They were 3 weeks into it, and Jake was studying harder than he ever had before. The engineering units were fascinating, and the strides that the PPDC was making could mean huge things, even the civilian sphere, although most weren't interested when we brought those things up. They were drilled on tactics and kaiju science as well, to the point that he saw the facts written on the board in his dreams. Equally challenging were the Quoon combat room sessions. They required to master more forms of martial arts than could be counted on both hands, including 52 sessions of Jaeger Bushido. On top of that, they were expected to increase their endurance, which meant running 2 miles at the beginning and end of each day. Those who soared in the academic part of the Jaeger Academy often faltered in the combat room, and many of those who excelled in the combat room did not excel anywhere else. But between the classroom and the combat room, most potential rangers that Jake had started had quit by now. At this moment, though, Jake was watching one determined young woman struggle through her 3rd mile. Today was a challenge day, meaning they upped the ante for all the potentials remaining. They were all expected to run 4 miles in one go in order to continue forward. She was incredibly gifted when it came to the kaiju lessons, and when it came to combat, she was insightful enough to anticipate others' movements and counteract them before they realized what was happening. It was just here that she struggled. 3.5 miles. Other candidates watched her almost bemusedly, many of them having already finished. Jake had finished at the head of the pack, and while she wasn't the only one still on the track, she was the one suffering the most. Jake stood. Some of the others looked at him as if he had grown a second head when he jogged out onto the track. He pulled up next to her and kept pace. "It's Arisha, right?" he asked. She spared him a glance, her long braids sweeping from side to side. "Yeah?" "You don't have a hard time with the rest of the training. Why the running?" "I'm used," she said, "to having music to keep time with. The rhythm. But we're not allowed." He smiled. "Is that all?" he asked as he lengthened his strides to get ahead of her. He turned to face her, running backwards, and began to sing. Well, to rap, which took just as much skill to do in the first place, but especially while running backwards. Softly as if I played piano in the dark, found a way to channel my anger now ready to embark. The world's a stage and everyone's got to play their part. God, with a signal clear as day, put my Glock away as I got a stronger weapon that never runs out of ammunition, so I'm ready for war, okay? Put my Glock away, I got a stronger weapon that never runs out of ammunition, so I'm ready for war, okay? Put my Glock away, I got a stronger weapon that never runs out of ammunition, so I'm ready for war, okay? Born ready. War ready! Several of the cadets called. Now Arisha had found her stride and was flying through the second half of the mile. Sorry. Born ready. War ready! She ran fast enough now that Jake had to face forward to match pace with her. Born ready! War ready! And together, they were able to be the rhythm Arisha needed to finish the required 4 miles. By the end, she was laughing. Jake glanced at the instructor, expecting a reprimand for interfering. But instead, he watched her try to keep a small smile off her lips. They celebrated Arisha's completed challenge that night by nearly clearing out the cafeteria. The rest of the training required before Pond's training seemed to blow past them. Before they knew it, they were lining up to take turns in the simulators. The first wave of candidates, members from his class and others, were about to step into the pods when the doors on the north side of the room opened. Stacker Pentecost was a giant in a room of insects. His presence commanded the entire room. He took in each of them in turn before walking to one of the simulators. "You are a step closer to joining the most elite force that has ever been and perhaps ever will be," Pentecost said. "This collaborative effort between nations has been years in the making. You, who make it into a Jaeger, will be a vital part of this. Every biologist, every engineer, every technician who works inside the Shadow Dome does it to support you in your fight, in your war. Do not disappoint them." He nodded to the technicians in charge of the day's simulations and began to leave the room. He paused at the doorway he had come from. His head turned just so slightly to look over his shoulder. "And Jacob Pentecost, you are dismissed. You may go home." Arisha gasped, small but audible as Pentecost left. Jake felt his stomach drop out, but he couldn't look at her or anyone else as he followed. "Sir?" "Sir." Jake quickened his pace so he could get in front of him. "Sir, what have I done to deserve dismissal?" Pentecost leveled his gaze at him, a hard stare that would have frozen him to the spot if he hadn't been raised by the man's brother. "You destroyed a building and cost the lives of your companions." "I saved the block that night." "You caused the attack to fall on the block that night," he corrected, his jaw hard. "You should not have taken on something so much bigger than you by yourself. You weren't trying to save others, you were trying to be a hero." "Respectfully, sir, that is not true," Jake said. "It was a concerted effort not to clench his teeth together. I took responsibility for the fact that I drew them to the block, and I handled it." "It was not your place to handle it, Moses," Pentecost retorted. His voice was just slightly raised, not quite a shout, but not quite a speaking volume either. "You should have called the police, or your uncle, or me." He heard nothing but the thundering of his heart in his ears as he yelled back, "The police? They were always looking for excuses to kill us. You know that. You may be important and powerful now, but you're just as black as I am. Uncle Jeremiah was never home, and you? I was supposed to trust a phone number I was forced to remember when I was 5? I've never known you." "You know, I thought I could make a difference. But if I'm going to be treated like N's trash here, then I guess I'll just shove off. It's a shame, though, isn't it? The night you're kicking me out for is the night that got me here in the first place, believe." Pentecost didn't try to stop him as he stormed out of the building. He didn't say goodbye to him before he left the Jaeger Academy. He didn't even bother to have someone else do it for him. "Well, who needs him anyway?" Jake said to himself as he booked a hotel until he could catch a flight out. "Not like I ever saw him when I was a kid." Little did Jake know he was also never going to see him again. "That'll do nicely," Moses said as he pried loose the housing for the Ranger lock-in. Apparently gamers use the rigs for improved virtual reality. Since it didn't really help him with his work and they paid good money, he was happy to let them have it. He brought his prize out of the Jaeger carcass that was dragged across Massachusetts' largest bridge. His truck bed was loaded with other things he had pulled out of it as well. But the important things were stored in the front seat. Things that created the neural bridge. Things that helped the bridge not overload. Jaegers might have needed 2 companions, but his plans for the neural bridge didn't. Jaegers might have needed 2 pilots, but his plan for the neural bridge didn't. Moses spent a couple more hours climbing in, out, and around the Jaeger. He picked the pieces that would sell for the highest with plans to come back later. In the end, the machine wasn't as damaged as maybe it was originally assessed. After that, he took his haul home to prepare for sale. The sites he used for selling were impossible to find unless the buyer knew what they were looking for and had been referred there by at least 3 other people, which made Moses feel fairly secure as he sold off Jaeger parts bit by bit. By the end of the night, he had made a cool 3,000 pounds, and none of it was off of his reserve box on the neural bridge technology. When Moses had first started pillaging the machines, he had tried to get Pest in on the action. It was just the 2 of them left out of all the boys from the block, and it didn't feel right not to invite him. Biggs had passed away a year before he started from a heart attack. But Pest said he was very secure in the job that he had. He instead invited him to come meet his family next Christmas. Moses had told him he would think about it and call him. He never did as much as he meant to. It just didn't seem right to meet his kids only to be Uncle Moses the criminal. His profitable work done for the evening, he took the box of neural bridge gear to his workroom. On the work table was a mechanical arm and a leg from the knee down, complete with toes. Toes were the hardest thing he had ever worked on yet, but the girl who needed the leg wanted to be a ballerina, and she had told him very firmly that the only way she could do that was if she had toes. He laughed a little as he went to work attaching the neural bridge transmitters to the leg first. The arm was also important, but the boy who needed that was still recovering from the car accident that required the amputation in the first place. Once the technology was fully integrated into the leg, he installed the corresponding pieces into a simple metal headband. He was able to fully control the leg while he was wearing it, even wiggling the toes. It was a good night's work, and he was ready for bed. And this was how he spent his days, and he figured it was how he would spend them until he either grew too old and creaky to do it or died. What he didn't expect was for Tia to come find him one day on one of his Jaeger runs. "This is how you make your living, huh?" she asked as she picked her way through the wreckage in sensible flats. She wore a pinstriped jumpsuit with a smart matching blazer. Her hair was micro-braided and hung past her shoulder blades. "I always pictured you as a small business owner." "Well, you're not wrong," he said. He carefully moved the radiation shielding away from where he was working. He didn't want to uncover the state of the uranium inside. "I didn't expect to see you here." "You didn't write." "No, I didn't." "Should have," he admitted. "Yeah, you should have, but I bet you knew that wasn't why I'm here." She sat on the edge of a crate he had already closed up with the intent to sell as an overpriced mystery box. "Do you know why I am?" "It's not to take me out for a drink, innit?" The uranium out of his way, Moses reached into the emptied space to extract the part he really wanted. "Do you still want to pilot a Jaeger, Moses?" He stopped what he was doing and leaned back on his heels. "Stacker threw me out," he reminded her. "Marshal Pentecost died 10 years ago. Don't tell me your future did the same." Tia squinted at him. "Actions have consequences, Moses. Do you remember me telling you that?" "Yeah," Moses laughed. "It was right before you and the girls killed an alien with an ice skate and a lamp. Why aren't you in a Jaeger?" "I prefer tracking down people with potential. Right now I'm tracking down you." She sighed. "The PBDC knows that you've been selling parts on the black market. I don't want to put the ultimatum on the table. I respect you too much for that. I've missed you too much for that. But the ultimatum is on the table, isn't it? Pilot or prison?" Tia considered this for a moment and nodded. "I think we'd both rather you stepped up to the plate and did something important rather than end up in jail." "What if I'm doing something important, Tia?" he asked as he stood. "All you see here is me mugging a Jaeger, but what if I'm doing something important right now?" "What could you possibly be doing stealing Jaeger parts that you couldn't do legitimately?" "Solar-powered neural bridge prosthetics." Stunned into silence, Tia simply stared at him. Moses watched the words sink in until she said, "That isn't possible. Jaegers need 2 rangers to pilot them. Of course an entire Jaeger does, but if you narrow it down to a hand, a leg, an entire arm, our brains can handle the neural load just fine." Moses crossed the Jaeger to stand in front of her. "You're sitting on all of this technology without considering the applications it could have for people in need. They're more expensive to make now, yeah, but even VCRs cost hundreds of dollars when they first made them." "We are using the application of the Jaegers for people in need. They need protecting." She held up her hands in surrender. "But you're right. Maybe there are other avenues that need exploring. Maybe you could show us if you came to the Shatter Dome." "I never did pass Pond's training." "But you were the highest in your class up until then. Come on, Moses, just come in for a week, and I'll leave you alone. You'll never have to see me again." Maybe I'll say no so you have to keep following me around, he half-heartedly joked. Well, damn. I guess I better leave you to your work if you aren't going to be reasonable today, Tia said, making her way back to her car. Pest is going to be disappointed, though. Wait, Pest? Oh, did I say Pest? She asked. She opened her car door. Really shouldn't have. But you'd have to come back to the Shadow Dome to find out for yourself. Okay, fine. 1 week. Perfect. I'll get it all arranged. She got in the car and rolled down her window. Hopefully we'll get you in a Jaeger before your Calypso shows up. You think she hasn't? I don't know. It doesn't seem like you've come home yet. I'll see you later, she said. When Tia was determined to do something, she didn't let go. Even knowing this, Moses was surprised at how quickly the travel was arranged. He unloaded the rest of his merchandise off on buyers and was on his way. She was waiting to welcome him when he arranged the help. Excuse me. That is a typo. She was waiting to welcome him when he arrived on the helipad. Same sensible shoes. This time she wore a dress suit with a leather collar. Her micro braids were coiled high on her head instead of loose. She welcomed him warmly and led him inside for the tour. Passing the Jaegers was more than he had expected. Seeing them stand tall and in full repair rendered them more awesome than the broken-down heaps he harvested from. And through these doors you'll find our head of weapons development, Tia was saying. Moses! A slim man threw himself around Moses' shoulders. Are you actually here? Are you actually going to pilot a Jaeger? Pest? Bruv, is that you? He held him at arm's length, taking in the dark hair starting to grow gray and the bomber jacket thrown over a nice button-up shirt. Believe! The kids say I'm the most wicked dad around because I work here, Pest said. Well, the little ones do. My oldest kid is over it. But you didn't answer me. Are you going to pilot a Jaeger? I hope so, a voice said from the doorway. Moses turned and saw Mako Mori with her arms crossed. His father always told me to find him if I was running low on good rangers. Stacker said that to you? Moses asked. Mako nodded. He did. Are you here to prove him right? Thank you so very much for watching this reading. Ooh, I didn't realize it was going to be an hour long. Thank you so very much for your patience if you did watch this whole reading. I look forward to hearing from you. I hope you have a wonderful day.